Okay, great.
All right, so welcome everyone to our July mini summit session. And it's the second day today. So we're joined by our speaker, Richea Perry, and he'll be talking about protecting critical data. So over to you, Richea.
Hi, thank you so very much. Okay, great everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on wherever you are in the world at this point in time. I am definitely happy to be sharing with you to be a part of this Open Security Summit. And very important is that I really do appreciate the work that has been done by this community and also for all the persons that have found it possible at this point in time to be sharing in this session. And very importantly is that feel free to ask questions, to stop me along the way, things that you might not understand clearly. I mean, do not free to ask questions, and I'm also going to ask my uh, moderator to assist me as I go along with any possible questions or maybe raising of hands that persons might want to interject as I go along in this presentation. So pretty much a little bit about me in that I am a cybersecurity professional enthusiast, GRC analyst, and I pretty much have been in the IT space for about 18 years, where I transitioned from being a system administrator to network administration to information system management, and then into cybersecurity and the GRC space in particular. So that's in a nutshell about who I am as an individual. So in this presentation, I will provide you with a basic understanding of the important aspects involving adapting and implementing a framework or standard that is required to meet compliance and, most importantly, to safeguard critical data from cyber attacks. Now, let's get into the meat of the matter. Now, you will agree with me that protection of data, and let's talk about data, this can be personal data or data that belongs to an organization or entity or a business. Protecting that data is more critical than ever before. And the question that I have is, in light of that, why is safeguarding data critical than ever before? Anyone has a idea, any suggestions, any feedback? Are there any responses? Okay, if not, well, pretty much as it relates to why safeguarding data is critical than ever before, and there are a number of reasons. As we all know, that data is power, right? And the person, the organization, the individual that has possessions of vital information can do a lot of harm, a lot of danger. Can also, based on the fact that data breaches are inevitable, and this of course can lead to reputational damage, lawsuits, and more importantly, financial losses that can even put companies or organizations out of business, and the list goes on. And we have read and we have also listened or watched various discussion about these situations happening from time to time as it relates to data breaches occurring. Now, in light of those reasons, organizations definitely must ensure that they have the most effective security controls in place that safeguard, very importantly, their people, processes, and technology in light of the imminent risks to the CIA of data, and that is the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data within these organizations. And when you have valuable data in an organization, it is therefore important to have a strong information security governance structure. And what better way to achieve this than implementing an information security management system known as an ISMS. And pretty much the ISMS brings order and structure to an organization's data. And very important is that it creates a solid baseline for securing data within an organization. Now, information security management systems. Now, as was mentioned earlier in this presentation, I'll be looking at the protecting of critical data through the implementation of an information security management systems to meet compliance. Hence, I just want for you to get an understanding of what an information system is, right? An information system and also its purpose, right? As I am not assuming that everyone that is connected on this webinar understands what an ISMS is, right? So with that said, then pretty much an information security management system is a set of policies and procedures for systematically managing and organization sensitive data. And the goal of an ISMS is to minimize, or the goal of the information security management system is to minimize the risk to the data and to ensure business continuity by proactively limiting the impact of possible data breaches that can occur within an organization. Now, bearing in mind the focus of this presentation, we all know that compliance today is a highly discussed topic, especially on a global scale, right? So companies definitely want to be compliant in order to operate on a globally acceptable standard. And many organizations seek to acquire compliance depending on their industry for many beneficial reasons, and one being consumer and stakeholder trust or confidence in the organization operations, in that whatever organizations they are operating, in order to establish the necessary best practices, which I will discuss further in the next slide. So information security compliance is pretty much or involves meeting the rules or standards about protection of data and information. So we have our information security management system, and we also want to implement an information security management system in order to achieve or to meet compliance with regulations in order to operate in this global marketplace. And the question that we have is, why do organizations seek to be compliant? Why do organizations seek to be compliant? Right, so pretty much there are a number of reasons that organizations seek to be compliant. And one of the main reasons is that effective, and the number one reason, right, is risk reduction. Risk reduction. And an effective compliance program can help help an organization to mitigate all the necessary risks, as this helps in preventing possible events from affecting the company's organizations. And an example of this is for example, all the compliance requirements within an organization for, let's say, backing up critical data. The Second, reason organization seeks to be compliant or seek to have systems in place that helps them to meet compliance is for greater efficiency, right? Greater efficiency. And when we talk about that, pretty much a business, every business needs efficiency, and there are two ways to improve your bottom line in any organization or any business, and that is to one, you want to increase revenues or decrease costs or expenses. And increasing revenue takes a lot of work, right? So that's one of the things, greater efficiency within the organization. Thirdly, is that companies seek compliance or seek to be compliant for better insights and business strategy alignments. And this is a case whereby, as you all know, that a business can only manage what they can measure. And a compliant management program will definitely help an organization to have better insights into their business by giving, for example, information that they need to directly control the operations on a day-to-day basis. And fourthly is brand reputation. And this cannot be overemphasized. Reputation of a company or organization is very vital, right? So trust is a foundational element in building any organization. And companies definitely want to know that they have a very good standing in the sight of the stakeholders as well as the consumers, the end users of their products or services, right? Need to have confidence in the reputation of that particular organization or company. So those are the reasons why companies seek to gain compliance in this global marketplace. Right, which now brings us to the gold standard for security compliance, right? That's the gold standard for security compliance. But before we look at this standard or framework for data security that can be adapted and implemented to meet compliance, I also want to bring your attention to some of these are standards that are used in, for example, the United States. And some of these might, example, include the Sarbanes-Oxley Act, which is pretty much like a compliance, right? And this act requires that financial records, for example, be retained for several years within the organization, right? We also have standards or frameworks like FISMA, which is the Federal Information Security Management Act, that considered information security to be a matter of national security. And this standard pretty much outlines a set of requirements that an organization uses to develop a data or data protection method surrounding the information in the organizations, right? So you do have organizations that have their standards of that are adopted in these countries for providing information security management within their organizations. Now, selecting a framework to meet compliance, right? Know that you're an organization, know that you're operating, and you want to gain compliance, you want to gain that trust in the marketplace. Then the next stage is to find a framework, to find a standard that you can adapt within your organization to establish that information security management capability. Now, what are some of these factors that determine the selection of a standard or framework to meet compliance? And there are a number of standards, or there are a number of factors that one has to bear in mind, that when it comes on to selecting or making a decision as to which framework or standard must be adopted within your organization. And I've identified pretty much one main element that determines the framework or standard that is implemented or adopted within an organization. Right? So selecting a framework to meet compliance depends mainly on, very importantly, the industry, right? That's the industry the business or organization operates in. That's the critical thing. That is what actually determines the framework or standard that is implemented to meet compliance within the organization. What industry is my company or organization operating in? Right? For example, if you are in the healthcare industry, then you have a standard or framework that is established, known as HIPAA. That's the HIPAA. And if you go on to the financial services, then you will look at things such as PCI, DSS, right? So that's one of the main elements for selecting a framework, pretty much the standard that the organization operates and the nature of the information that you are trying to protect from the possible risks associated. And as we continue to look at the gold standard for information security compliance, now I would want to assume that at this point brings your attention to the ISO 27001, and that is the standard that I will be looking at that can be implemented within an organization to able to establish that security of information. And as I said before, there are many other frameworks or standards that an organization can adopt in their organization, right? But the reason I've selected this is because it is described as the gold standard for information security compliance. And many organizations seek to be compliant with the ISO 27001. Now, the information or the ISO 27001 is pretty much the international standard for an information security management system. So this is a standard that has been established for this particular purpose. And it is the most commonly used IT security compliance standard, right? So it sets out, it outlines the best practices or best approaches for providing the appropriate security for data and information. That's pretty much what it does, right? And it sets out this information security compliance standard can support all the other IT related functions or regulations, as it gives that governance structure or approach to securing and maintaining, as I mentioned before, the CIA, the confidentiality, the integrity, and the availability of data and information within an organization. And the standard also provides a comprehensive list of security controls or measures that you can be implemented within an organization to safeguard its data. And I highly recommend that if you are not familiar with the ISO 27001, that you could also do some research on this documentation. It's a very comprehensive document that can be found online that gives you all the details surrounding the ISO 27001 and its application for securing data within an organization. Now, let us get into the very important aspect of this presentation, and that is to look at the implementation process of the ISO 27001 as an information security management system. Okay, great. So hopefully everyone is seeing my screen clearly, but pretty much this diagram gives a comprehensive view of what is entailed in implementing the ISO 27001 ISMS within your organization in order to establish a strong baseline for security or securing your data in the organization. And always bear in mind that compliance does not guarantee security, but it establishes a strong baseline for security within the organization. It helps, as mentioned earlier, to give a company a reputation. When an organization know that you're compliant with a certain acceptable standard, then stakeholders, investors, consumers, persons interacting with your organization have more confidence and trust in your operations. Now, this diagram, I will be doing this at a high level based on the fact that there are a number of details associated with each of these functions that are highlighted or shown on this graph or diagram per se, right? So those that are highlighted in green are the activities that are required. Those highlighted in yellow are the international standards, and gray, the set or group that they are fall into, and then the documents or records. Now, very important is that ISO 27000 is a family of standards, right? So you have the ISO 27000 family, and from that you have ISO 27001, ISO 27002, etc. Right? So in implementing ISO 27001, then you have a number of supporting standards along the way that are geared towards helping you to achieve or to implement this standard in your organization. Now let us start with the first thing that as it relates to implementing the ISO 27001 within your organization is to get management support. That's number one. Like with any other things within an organization, you have to have management support on board to say, yeah, this is what we want to implement. We recognize the risks associated with the organization, and we definitely need to have this standard. So you first have to gain management support. Otherwise, the implementation of this system will not be successful. So that's the first thing. So you gain management support, and secondly, you move on to defining the scope of the ISMS, right? And the scope looks at the aspect of the organization that you want to apply, right? It looks at the aspect of the organization that you want to apply this ISMS to, right? So an organization, depending on the size of the organization, might decide that they want to apply ISMS compliance to the marketing team, the IT department, the operations department, right? Depending on the nature of the organization. So that is what you talk about scope. So you determine your scope, and it could be the entire organization that you want to apply the SMS compliance to in the organization, right? So once you have identified the scope, where we're going to be applying this system, then the next thing that you want to do is to look at all the critical information assets within that division, within that aspect of the company that falls into the scope, right? All the critical information assets. Once you have identified those assets, then you move on to assessing the risk, right? Associated with the information within those assets. That's the next phase. And if you notice, very importantly, is that there is a where we have this section here, right? The ISO, if you notice, where you have number 4, assess information security risk, then you have the yellow marking, that's the box indicating ISO 27005. Now, that's also another standard that has been developed that falls into that ISO 27001 family that will provide you with all the relevant details as it relates to assessing information security risk. So that's one of the very good things about the ISO 27001 family of standards in its implementation. It comprises of a very detailed set of supporting documents that helps you along the way in this process of achieving the ISO 27001 compliance, and also aids you in the implementation process of this this system. And this is something that cannot be implemented in a 1 month or 2 weeks. It depends on the nature of the organization. It can be a 1-year project. It can also extend beyond a 1-year project, depending on the nature and the volume of information that is within this organization. So once you have assessed the information risk, then you move on to prepare your statement of applicability. And the statement of applicability pretty much outlines, right? It outlines the main link between the risk assessment and the risk treatment in an enterprise or in the organization, right? So pretty much it's a requirement for information security management system. So it looks at where the risk exists and the controls that you plan to implement in order to mitigate those risks. And if there are other controls that you are not implementing, then it also outlines all of those details. So once you have achieved that, then you want to look at risk treatment. That is where you make the decision as to, are you going to accept the risk? Are you going to transfer the risk, right? Then you move on to stage 6, which is to develop the ISMS implementation program, right? Very important is that to implement the ISMS, then you need a comprehensive structure program that governs all that will be done in this process. And inside there, you have the project plan, right? This is where your project management skill comes into being, right? And all the necessary planning for implementation of this process. And you also have the ISO 27003 documentation that provides you with all the details required to achieve this aspect of the process. And once we have achieved that section, then you will move on to stage 7, right? After stage 7, then stage 8, actually, which is the information security management system. That's the ultimate thing that we are trying to achieve there. With all this information gathering, all this risk assessment, all the identification of all of your critical assets. This now pulls into the information security management system. And once we have achieved this information security management system, then we move on to stage 9. And stage 9 is basically what you would call an expansion of all that is happening in stage 8, right? So this is where all the operational artifacts are collected, right? So as mentioned earlier, that the ISMS or the ISO 27001 is a detailed document, and it outlines all the steps, all the requirements, all the details, all this necessary information is outlined in that document that tells you what is required to meet the ISMS, right? And some of those things are highlighted here in step 9, right? Things like your business continuity plan documentation, your audit reports, logs, your metrics, your incidents, policies, standards and procedures, guidelines, management reviews, all these things are required as part of this ISMS 27001 implementation. And for step 9, you have the ISO 22301 that gives all the details for achieving this aspect of this process. Right, that's the beauty of working with the ISO documentation process. Then you move on to step 10, right? So next thing is to look at your internal audits. So having gone through all of these steps from step 1 to step 9, then you want to carry out your internal audits of all that has been done to ensure that you are in line with what the standard outlines before you get an external audit from the ISO 27001 official auditors. Once that is achieved, then you go on to stage 11, which is your compliance review. Right, compliance review that takes into consideration the audit that has been done and all the steps that you have implemented to this point in the organization to meet compliance. Then it moves on to step 12, which is the corrective actions. Right, so you now look at to see where the organization is falling short in terms of its implementation and what needs to be done in order to fix those issues before doing that external audit. Then you move on to the certification phase, right? And that is the grand phase that many companies work towards. They want to get to that phase of achieving that certificate, achieving that compliance, as it makes an organization stands out in terms of its reputation and its the trust. As we all know, that ISO 27001 has a very strong reputation worldwide for many companies in terms of their operations. And once that is done at stage 13, then you move on to stage 14, which is the certification audit, right? That's where the external auditors will now come in to assess all the steps, all documentation, all the processes, all the work that has been done to this point to see whether or not you are in line with what is required for this ISMS process. Once everything is successful, then you are issued that certificate. And in stage 15, they say party is on. That is where management, everyone is excited, everyone is happy for having put in all of this work, not to mention all the finances, the time, the expertise that is required in this process. Then you go on to stage 16, and that is to operate the ISMS routinely, right? So it is not just about to implement to meet the compliance, but importantly is to continue to make changes to ensure that you're always in compliance with the necessary ISO 27001 regulations. And finally is to do your annual surveillance audits, right? So part of the requirements of this implementation of the ISO 27001 is the audit reviews that are done internally, and also to meet those regular external ISO 27001 requirements. So there we have it in a nutshell, the implementation of an information security management system to protect critical data within an organization, right? So protecting critical data through the implementation of an information security management system to meet compliance. And as mentioned earlier, is that this process at face value might seem simple, but it does involve a lot of work, a lot of team effort, a lot of organization, governance support, and understanding of the ISO 27001 documents and the controls that are required. So at this point, if there are any questions, then I will take those questions. If not, then this is the end of my presentation.
All right. So if you have any question, you can unmute yourself, or just type it in the chat. Um, I yeah, you're free to unmute yourself. So all right. So I think there are no questions. Thank you so much, Richea.
It's a pleasure.
It was a great talk. So we learned lots from the session, and hoping to have you again in the next summit session in September.
Yes, definitely will.
Thank you so much. Have a great day. Bye bye.
Okay, thank you. Same to you. Bye.